I caught up with an old friend, let's call him David, just a few days ago. He looked completely drained, but, he still had this kind of nervous, hopeful energy about him. He started listing off his week like he was reading a combat log. He'd pulled 3 double shifts, finally fixed that nagging plumbing issue in the master bath, and then spent his entire Saturday listening to his wife just vent about her toxic workplace. He leaned in and he lowered his voice with this look of absolute certainty and said, "I've done everything right. I've been the perfect rock. Things have to turn around tonight."
Right, so he's working off a script in his head.
Exactly. He was operating on this internal, invisible ledger. The sources we're looking at today call it a covert contract. He truly believed that if he just poured enough utility, enough stability into the relationship, then passion would, just naturally flow back out. He saw his sacrifices as a direct down payment on desire.
The math seemed flawless to him.
It did. But then his wife actually arrived to meet us, and the interaction was, well, it was painful to watch. She didn't look at him with gratitude, and she certainly didn't look at him with lust. She looked at him the way you look at a sturdy piece of furniture.
Oh.
Barely any eye contact. She handed him a bag of groceries she didn't want to carry and just said, "I'm exhausted. You handle dinner." The shift in David's face was instant. The hope just evaporated, replaced by this confused, hollow resentment.
And that moment is the entire deep dive, really. It perfectly encapsulates the trap.
It does. David thought he was negotiating for desire, but he was actually extinguishing it by making himself perfectly useful, perfectly accessible, and perfectly safe. He hadn't become her lover.
He'd become her infrastructure.
Yeah. And as I watched them leave, the brutal reality of the dynamic really set in for me. You can be the most reliable utility in the world, but nobody ever fantasizes about their refrigerator. So today, we are taking a deep dive into this pervasive and honestly painful belief, the trap of utility. This idea that provisioning and stability somehow eliminate sexual attraction. It's the foundational complaint we see repeated across wide swaths of the internet. Our mission is to understand not just the theory, which, originates in the Manosphere and Red Pill communities, but also the profound psychological and social cost of adopting this kind of highly transactional worldview. We'll be holding their framework up to critical scrutiny using rigorous academic sources from sociology, evolutionary psychology, and ethics.
Okay, let's unpack this. We have to start by acknowledging the pain David felt, that feeling of emotional bankruptcy where all this monumental effort, the stability, the provisioning, the emotional labor, it just doesn't translate into genuine affection or physical desire. That's an incredibly common and painful experience for a lot of people. So this deep dive is about understanding the logic being applied to that painful situation and, figuring out if that logic actually holds up to objective analysis. We are exploring materials from a corner of the internet known as the Manosphere, specifically the Red Pill and PUA, or pickup artist communities. These groups construct sexual strategies by explicitly integrating their interpretations of evolutionary psychology and economic theories.
Fusing biology and economics.
Exactly. What's fascinating is how these sources explicitly fuse biological theories with these very harsh economic metaphors to create a complete, albeit very controversial, framework for understanding relationships. We'll first examine their core claims, the logic, the terms, the theories they use to support this idea that utility kills desire. And then we'll pivot to what mainstream sociology and evolutionary science actually have to say about this highly transactional worldview.
So, if we accept the premise of David's covert contract, it really forces us to ask a fundamental question. How do these communities define the difference between a relationship built on genuine feeling and one built on, an exchange? What's the core conceptual language they're using to describe the catastrophic failure of the quote-unquote nice guy?
It all revolves around the failure of what they term the covert contract. And this failure is central to what they call the blue pill error.
The blue pill, a term borrowed from the Matrix, right?
Right. It represents the delusion that genuine sexual desire can be purchased. The man believes that if he applies enough utility, enough stability, enough resources, which they cynically term beta-bucks, or acting as a beta provider, that he will eventually be rewarded with passion, affection, and loyalty.
And the result, according to this framework, is that the man stops being seen as a dynamic, complex human partner. He becomes infrastructure.
Precisely. He transitions from a subject, an object of desire, to a utility object. He is the family's service provider, The one who performs the maintenance, pays the bills, and, like David, absorbs the emotional stress.
And this is where they argue the emotional and physical withdrawal from the partner becomes like an inevitable outcome.
Yes. The utility trap asserts that you cannot purchase affection. You can only purchase compliance. And even that's not guaranteed.
The sources offer a really brutal consequence when this contract breaks. We read that anecdote about a couple in Chicago, I think they were called David and Sarah. The husband, feeling resentful of being treated like a walking wallet, decided to test the trap of utility by withdrawing his labor entirely.
Yeah, that example is really instructive because it highlights the trap's extreme volatility. The man thought he was removing the transactional element to force his wife to desire him, not what he did.
Right, he's trying to reset the terms.
He was. So he stopped planning dates, he stopped fixing the plumbing, he stopped providing that emotional support. But the source material notes that the household ecosystem just collapsed. The woman didn't suddenly see an irresistible high-value man.
What did she see?
She saw a partner who had checked out, a functionary who had stopped functioning.
So the sudden lack of partnership didn't create space for desire to grow.
Not at all. It created stress and panic, and it led to the collapse of the foundational social unit of the marriage.
The man was so focused on trying to acquire what they call genuine desire, he ended up sabotaging the entire relationship.
A relationship which was built on the necessary, though, as they would argue, insufficient, foundation of utility.
And this failure brings us to a crucial distinction that the Manosphere insists upon when they're analyzing desire. They draw a really hard line between two types.
Yes, negotiated desire and genuine desire. Negotiated desire is what they call duty sex. It's mechanical intimacy based on obligation, exchange, or even guilt.
That sounds bleak.
It is, and this is exactly what they argue the utility trap achieves. You might get compliance, but it's hollow. Genuine desire, by contrast, is the goal. It's spontaneous, visceral, a biological want. For them, utility is not just irrelevant to this primal response. It's explicitly viewed as an extinguisher of it.
Okay, so to give this really brutal transactional view, a kind of historical or anthropological anchor, these communities reach deep into history. They cite something called Briffault's Law. Where exactly do they get this concept, and what does it assert about the balance of power in mating?
Well, they cite anthropologist Robert Briffault, who wrote, and I'm quoting here, "The female, not the male, determines all the conditions of the animal family. Where the female can derive no benefit from association with the male, no association takes place."
And they take this as, what, irrefutable evidence of a biological law?
Yes, of the female's absolute biologically determined selectivity in mating. It's presented as a fundamental, unchangeable rule of the game. But what's crucial is the brutal corollary drawn from this law by the Manosphere. They say the benefit must be current and ongoing.
Current and ongoing.
Yes. This is the mechanism that psychologically invalidates the efforts of men like your friend David. This is where they introduce the concept of the memory wipe.
The memory wipe, meaning past sacrifices hold zero balance in the ledger of female attraction. That sounds incredibly cynical. I mean, how do they justify removing shared history and gratitude from the entire equation?
They justify it using a cold, relentless evolutionary logic. The rationale provided in these sources is this. In a primitive environment, past food is consumed. It does not sustain the group today.
Okay.
Only current hunting or current provisioning or current protection capability matters for immediate survival. Therefore, past emotional labor, past support, or past financial contributions are, from a biological standpoint, irrelevant to the immediate genetic assessment of a mate.
So it's not framed as a personal betrayal.
No, not at all. It's not malice on the part of the woman, but a cold, efficient arithmetic of evolutionary programming. Once you stop providing novel value, or if a better provider appears on the scene, your historical sacrifices are instantly wiped clean from the attraction ledger.
So you are only as valuable as the current resources and protection you offer.
Exactly. Which fundamentally undercuts the entire emotional contract of a long-term, history-based relationship.
Wow. Framing past effort as biologically irrelevant just completely removes any possibility of shared history or gratitude from the relationship equation.
It does. It's a brutal conclusion to reach, but you have to understand it to understand their framework for the trap of utility. And that brutality leads us directly to the central paradox of the good provider. The predictable, stable, always available man creates excessive security and certainty. And according to this entire framework, safety is the killer of sexual tension.
So the stability that David was offering, the predictability of his support, it wasn't just not helping him, it was actively working against him. What's the mechanism there? How does safety supposedly extinguish arousal?
This is a direct application of their specific interpretation of evolutionary selection mechanisms. They argue that female arousal circuitry is supposedly triggered by cues of genetic fitness, what they call alpha traits.
Right, and these aren't just like being tall or having a square jaw.
No, they're heavily behavioral. Confidence, high social dominance, and, crucially, a hint of unpredictable, dangerous energy. The underlying logic is that for attraction to be visceral and genuine, there has to be a degree of uncertainty.
Uncertainty.
Yes. The alpha represents a high reward, but also a high risk. The beta represents a low reward, but total security. In their view, the predictable, always available beta, by eliminating all necessary uncertainty and risk, eliminates the tension required to maintain that primal arousal.
So the beta provider transitions from being a prize to being a service provider. He moves from being someone whose presence is a privilege, someone who might leave, who might be taken by another woman, to someone whose utility is merely an entitlement, like a light switch.
Exactly. He becomes vital, but invisible and utterly non-sexual. The absence of scarcity makes the resource, the man himself, lose his perceived value in what they call the sexual marketplace. And this is the moment, in their view, that the covert contract fails catastrophically because he has eliminated the very element tension that sustains desire.
The utility trap isn't just a consequence of a broken relationship dynamic then. It's a symptom of a much larger foundational ideology. To understand the utility trap, we have to zoom out, moving from David's personal frustration to the larger fundamental view of relationships that defines these communities. Tell us about the ideological landscape of the manosphere.
Well, the manosphere is a term used to describe a loosely connected group of anti-feminist online communities. This includes men's rights activists, or MRAs, who focus on legal issues, pickup artists, PUAs, who are focused on seduction tactics, men going their own way, MGTOW, who advocate for total separation from women, and then you have the red pill, TRP, which is really the ideological foundation, and incels, or involuntary celibates.
A lot of different groups.
Yes. And while their end goals can differ quite a bit, they share a common analytical framework and worldview.
And the central concept unifying this disparate collection is the red pill philosophy, which originated on the subreddit RTRP. It signifies an awakening to life's ugly truths, specifically rejecting the blue pill delusion that they associate with feminism and mainstream social narratives. It's all rooted in the metaphor from the 1999 film The Matrix.
Right. In the film, autonomous machines exploit humans, and this is all disguised by a virtual reality. And the red pill philosophy that claims that the exploitation is not by machines, but by women.
And this exploitation is disguised by what they call the myth of female oppression.
It completely turns traditional social critique on its head.
The claim is that feminism is an illusion that mistakes male exploitation for female liberation. It hides the fact that resources are being extracted from men. What specific resources do they believe are being extracted, and how do they claim feminism facilitates this?
The resource extraction, in their view, is comprehensive. It's financial resources, the beta-bucks.
Right.
It's physical labor, fixing the plumbing. And it's significant emotional labor, like absorbing a partner's workplace stress, exactly as David did.
So they argue that by convincing men that women are universally oppressed and need constant support and resources, that's the blue pill narrative, feminism provides the camouflage for this extraction.
Exactly. The source material is very explicit on this point. Feminism is defined not as a political movement for equality, but as a collective sexual strategy used by women.
A sexual strategy.
Yes. The goal of this strategy is to select the most genetically viable mates, switch mates strategically when a better option comes along, locate the best DNA possible, and garner the most resources they can individually achieve. The red pill, in turn, is presented as men's necessary corrective antidote, a counter-strategy against that pervasive female strategy.
And to lend academic authority to this very confrontational framework, these communities heavily appropriate academic concepts, particularly from evolutionary psychology, or EP. Why do they rely so heavily on EP, and what are the core concepts they borrow?
They rely on it because it provides a seemingly scientific, immutable justification for their worldview. It allows them to frame their strategies not as, say, manipulation, but as operating within the fixed natural laws of human mating. Our analysis of the sources shows that a large portion of red pill discussion revolves around EP to justify their seduction strategies and their denial of, emotional yearning. One of those famous EP concepts they appropriate is the Alpha-Fux-Beta-Bux principle, or AFBB. They argue this is an evolutionary mandate, that women are biologically compelled to seek a dualistic mating strategy. They seek an alpha sperm donor for good genes, a man who is attractive, risk-taking, dominant. And separately, they seek a dependable beta money dispenser for provisioning and security.
So this is presented as the explanation for the age-old jerk versus nice guy paradox, but seen through a grand evolutionary scale.
Absolutely. It's a coarsely worded, but sometimes a surprisingly faithful interpretation of certain EP discussions regarding female extra-pair mating strategies. The idea that a woman might seek security from one man and genetic viability from another. The red pill conclusion is that men like David fall squarely into the beta category. They offer critical stability, but they lack the genetic cues necessary to elicit that visceral desire.
They're necessary infrastructure, but they're substitutable.
Exactly. And this interpretation often leaps from complex game theory-based concepts to absolute certainty. This results in a very, very cynical concept of female behavior.
That certainty is formalized in a principle, right? The AWALT principle.
The AWALT principle, yes. Meaning, all women are like that. The framework concludes that female love is inherently tactical and opportunistic, and they contrast it with what they see as the male desire for unconditional love. This antagonistic Darwinian framework is then mapped directly onto contemporary gender politics, depicting feminism and anti-feminism as these female and male reproductive strategies pitted against each other.
And crucially, the academic critique we reviewed notes a significant bias here. Red pill discussion focuses almost entirely on female mating strategies and sexual assertiveness, often calling women brainless primates or tactable resources, while conveniently omitting or ignoring research on male instincts and behavior.
This is a classic example of the sexual double standard reproducing itself under the guise of science. Research on, say, male inclination towards extra-pair mating or male risk-taking behavior is considered unproblematic. It requires no explanation or censure within this framework.
So they use EP to depict this monolithic and inflexible view of female biological behavior, but they rarely apply the same rigid lens to male behavior.
Right. And that justifies their own strategic actions while condemning the strategies they perceive in women.
So if this EP framework justifies the dual mating strategy, the logical next step is action. The red pill is promoted as applied EP men can overcome the beta trap by learning how to mimic alpha behavior and elicit that genuine desire.
Yes, the immediate goal is subconscious attraction. It's about convincing women of good genes through behavioral cues. The sources detail that the traits that make a man attractive are claimed to be learnable skills. They call it game. And with enough practice, they say, it can make a man indistinguishable from one with natural talent.
And this pursuit requires consistently ignoring one's own emotional vulnerability?
Yes, which is formalized in the concept of holding frame.
Holding frame? What does that mean in practice?
It's the ability to not betray any emotional vulnerability. The theory is that women are supposedly attracted to stoicism and emotional inexpressiveness because it's equated with strength and competence. The idea is that men must be emotionally stable and stoic, ignoring their partner's emotional displays, because women rely on men to be the rock in times of crisis.
So to drop the frame, to show weakness or sadness, is to regress to the beta role.
And to risk losing her attraction.
Yes. This requires ignoring reality then, including expressions of displeasure or refusal, and interpreting them as tests of persistence or rapport breaks.
The source material encourages this. A woman saying, "I don't date short guys," or expressing other signs of disinterest is categorized not as genuine rejection, but as a test.
A test of his persistence.
And his own self-worth. The reasoning is that a truly high-value man would ignore the objection, thereby communicating his own genetic fitness and emotional stoicism. By ignoring the objection, he signals superiority to her superficial complaint.
The source material then takes this concept even further, leading to the highly contentious logical extension of last-minute resistance, or LMR.
Yes, and LMR is the deeply concerning idea that a woman will explicitly, but disingenuously, decline sexual consent.
Why would she do that, according to them?
Merely to save face and avoid being perceived as a slut by herself or her peers. This is a profound ethical concern because the man's strategy requires him to substitute his own deduced principle of game for the observable reality of the partner's stated desire and autonomy.
The logic says, if I persist, I will succeed because her no is only a formality required by social conditioning.
A very dangerous and ethically questionable idea.
Okay, so if EP provides the biological justification for the utility trap, then economic theories provide the structure for how these interactions should occur. This ideology imports a purely neoliberal transactional logic into intimacy, centered on the sexual marketplace SMP model.
Yes, the source analysis confirms this approach. It describes sexual sociality as being analyzed through the lens of a market. It's characterized by supply and demand for sex and relationships, where sexual pairing decisions are framed as utility-maximizing exchanges.
So it's an application of cold, rational choice theory to human intimacy.
Absolutely.
In this model, the roles are explicitly defined and they're adversarial. Women are framed as sellers of sex, and men are buyers, offering resources, time, or emotion.
And this requires quantification. Sexual market value, or SMV, is the quantification of a person's worth in this market. It's often conflated directly with attractiveness.
And the issue for the beta provider, as defined within the Manosphere itself, is a devaluation of traditional provisioning.
Exactly. For David, in our opening story, he wasn't just losing desire. He was investing in a currency utility that the source's claim had been systematically devalued.
So it's like an economic crash for his relationship strategy.
Precisely. In modern Western society, where women often have financial self-sufficiency and high sexual autonomy, the currency of basic provisioning money, services stability, what they call beta-bucks, has undergone hyperinflation.
Hyperinflation.
It no longer buys the same level of commitment or desire it might have bought in, say, the mid-20th century. The market approach views the value of a man as commodity as something acquired: status, charisma, success. The man who is relying on basic utility is making a catastrophic exchange rate error.
An exchange rate error. That's a great way to put it.
He's offering depreciating fiat currency, dollars, services, that's the utility, to buy genuine burning desire, a product which is only traded for appreciating crypto, genetic value alpha traits. He is overpaying for scraps because his currency is essentially worthless for achieving his goal of spontaneous passion.
And the extent of this economic metaphor is truly comprehensive. It moves beyond just the overall structure. It permeates the language used to describe people and actions within the relationship, explicitly treating them as assets.
Yes. The PUA and Red Pill texts that were analyzed explicitly treat both men and women and their actions as commodities or assets whose value can be calculated and tracked.
How does this model define the value of men?
Men are framed primarily as commodities whose value is acquired. They're often described in terms of a ranking scale or explicitly as things one can lock down. The crucial element here is the concept of man as investment. There is no inherent value in men, so they must be developed over time through material success, status, and charisma.
This reinforces the idea that men are the disposable sex.
Yes, their value isn't inherent, which makes utility disposable in the face of superior SMV from another man.
And women are equally commodified, but their value is based on inherent characteristics that degrade.
Correct. Women as commodity are seen as possessing inherent value, specifically youth, beauty, thinness, and breast size. But this value is characterized as something that degrades over time. They're often cast as damaged goods after a certain age or number of partners, or metaphorically as stores of value or vaults containing their sexuality.
And there's also the idea of woman as property.
Yes, suggesting that men, and only men, hold property rights over them, which you see in language about stealing a woman from another partner.
The most direct result of all this, which ties right back to the utility trap, is the commodification of the intimate activities themselves.
Absolutely. Activities as commodity objectifies both male attention-giving, time, money, emotion, and female sex-giving. The goal for men is described in these cold transactional terms, locking down a consistent supply of pussy. It treats sex as a commodity that can be accumulated or exchanged.
So sex becomes a thing you can get, have, or accumulate.
Right. It transforms the intimate act into a quantifiable object of trade.
And the practical framework for executing this exchange is drawn straight from corporate America.
The sexual interaction is described through a relentless application of sales terminology. This includes the famous sales call metaphor. Men make cold calls to get leads, they handle objections, and they strive for closes.
Closes.
A number close, a kiss close, a full close, or sex close. The goal is persuasion, often utilizing techniques like the yes ladder.
The yes ladder.
Which aims to get progressive agreement to small requests to lead to the final objective. The framework treats a woman's natural disinterest or reservations not as authentic emotional feedback, but as mere objections that need to be anticipated and disarmed, similar to a difficult customer on a sales call.
This transactional framework doesn't just describe a broken system. It prescribes highly calculated, sometimes manipulative actions designed to reverse the dynamics of the utility trap. This moves us into the practical strategies often employed in the pursuit of game, which are intended to eliminate utility and maximize attraction.
Yes, and the foundational step recommended to men suffering from the utility trap is the immediate cessation of all beta-brobs based on that broken covert contract. The core advice is to leverage utility itself.
So the advice is essentially to use utility as leverage. If a partner is sexually cold, the man should become resource cold. They call this mirroring.
Right. It's an intentional strategy to recalibrate a broken dynamic. If she withholds affection, he withholds financial support, chores, or emotional availability. The man must reclaim his time and his attention, making his presence a privilege, not entitlement.
The central goal is to introduce unpredictability and scarcity.
Exactly, which, according to the theory, is necessary to trigger that alpha attraction response. By being unpredictable, he is perceived as high value, busy, and potentially desirable to others, thus increasing his scarcity.
And this scarcity mindset reinforces that idea we talked about, that women's objections are just tests of persistence. We touched on last-minute resistance, LMR, earlier, but we need to address the ethical implications of this specific tactic in detail now that we've established this adversarial framework.
LMR is arguably the most ethically fraught tactic in game. It assumes that when a woman explicitly says no, near the point of intimacy, she does so disingenuously, merely to preserve her reputation or avoid social shame.
So the man is instructed to ignore the statement and persist.
Yes, because her true biological drive, her supposed attraction to his alpha persistence, is believed to override her stated desire. The ethical failure here is profound because it necessitates the denial of the partner's autonomy.
Right.
The man's strategy requires him to substitute his own deduced principle of game for the observable reality of his partner's stated desire. It's an interpretation that teaches the man to prioritize his own goal, the close, over mutual respect and genuine consent.
The strategies of withholding, testing, and ignoring consent are not just, benign dating tips. Critical academic analysis directly links many red pill strategies to the dark triad personality traits: narcissism, Machiavellianism, and psychopathy. How do researchers connect these specific tactics to these maladaptive traits?
Researchers examined the accounts of women who had dated men affiliated with the red pill and found a significant overlap between these prescribed strategies and dark triad behaviors. The link suggests that either the ideology attracts men with these predispositions, or the ideology actively encourages the cultivation of these traits as virtuous strategies.
Let's break down how each trait manifests in the recommended tactics. Starting with Machiavellianism, which is about strategic, manipulative planning.
A central Machiavellian theme is the rapid escalation of relationships, what's commonly known as love bombing. Red pill partners would apparently push for deeper commitment or intimacy very quickly to establish control and dependence early on.
And the women interviewed, what did they say about that?
They said it left them overwhelmed and unprepared to set healthy boundaries. It created a sense of indebtedness to the partner.
And what about the psychological warfare they use to maintain that control over time, particularly in relation to the utility trap?
That falls into coaxing and dread game. Dread game, specifically, involves using psychological tactics to manipulate emotions and decisions, often by subtly threatening abandonment to encourage compliance.
How would that work in practice?
It often involves passive-aggressive comments about the woman's weight, her career, or domestic duties, or bringing up attractive ex-partners. The goal is to leave the partner feeling anxious and eager to placate the man to avoid being abandoned. It ensures she continues to invest resources or utility into the relationship without demanding genuine emotion in return.
And the final piece is the fixation on outward presentation, the alpha image management, which sounds like a hallmark of narcissism.
That is image management. It's driven by the narcissistic belief that outward success translates directly to worthiness of admiration. They fixate intensely on physical fitness, material success like clothes and cars, and intellectual superiority to portray this successful, powerful alpha male.
So it's a performance.
It is. The women interviewed noticed that this polished image was often a facade, hiding behaviors that contradicted their carefully crafted persona, a classic narcissistic strategy used to maintain high SMV while internally feeling hollow.
This aggressive focus on performance and control comes with a severe psychological cost for the man who is adopting the game. It leads to the final cruel paradox of the utility trap. We saw this in the anecdote about Julian.
Yes, Julian was the successful man who had mastered the art of withholding. He used dread game and emotional detachment to ensure his girlfriend Maya remained intensely attracted to his aloof dominance. From the outside, he successfully reversed the utility trap. He cultivated desire in her precisely because he refused to be the beta provider.
But the result for him was profound loneliness and a crippling sense of paranoia.
That's the tragic irony the theory misses. Julian described constantly being on stage performing a role of aloof dominance. He felt he could never relax or show vulnerability, not his work fears nor his grief after a family loss.
Because that would break the frame.
Exactly. It would instantly regress him back into a beta, risking the loss of Maya's desire.
So he achieved the goal of the red pill.
He did. He successfully cultivated the physical desire he craved, but the cost was total emotional isolation. He had won the game of attraction by denying himself the very emotional connection, trust, and safety that defines a mature, successful partnership.
He was so terrified of being the disposable man, the utility, that he made himself the paranoid performer.
And lost the ability to feel safe in his own home.
He intentionally rejected utility and emotional vulnerability to become irresistible, but in doing so, he denied himself the very emotional connection that defines a successful partnership. It's the ultimate self-sabotage, proving that the victory in the game is profoundly hollow. We have thoroughly mapped the ideological structure, the biological justifications, the economic metaphors, and the practical consequences of the utility trap as defined by the Manosphere. Now, we must transition to the critical sources that directly critique these foundations. Let's move from the red pills theory to the objective academic assessment.
The first, and arguably most important, academic critique, targets the foundation of the entire structure. The sexual marketplace, or SMP, metaphor itself. Sociologists argue that sexual sociality is not a market in the mercantile sense, despite how strongly it might feel like one to the participants.
Why does applying market analysis tools fail so fundamentally in this context?
Because applying market analysis tools from economics often results in tautology.
Tautology.
The sources note that opposite findings in relationship dynamics can be equally explained away as utility maximizing functions. For example, if a high SMV woman marries a low SMV man for his money, it's a utility maximizing exchange. But if she leaves him for a poorer man she is intensely attracted to, that's also explained as utility maximization.
So either way, the theory works.
Right. She's just maximizing reproductive fitness over resources. The concept explained everything and therefore provides no real predictive or explanatory power.
So if the market model is insufficient because it forces human behavior into these rigid supply and demand boxes, what alternative framework do sociologists propose?
Sociologists propose that collective sexual life is better analyzed as a field, sexual fields theory. A field, unlike a market, is a structured social space with its own logic, its own hierarchy, and its own system of sexual capital.
So it's not just about simple exchanges of goods.
No, it involves collective perception, accumulated reputation, and negotiation within social rules that are constantly shifting.
What's the power of that distinction? I mean, why does the market metaphor persist even among scholars if it's so fundamentally flawed?
Well, the sources suggest the metaphor persists because sexual selection often feels like a market. This is likely due to the feeling of scarcity and competition, possibly amplified by the high degree of autonomy that has emerged between the sexual and economic fields in modern Western societies.
So when men like David offer financial utility, they're offering a highly valued resource, but it may not be the primary capital required in the sexual field.
Exactly. And the consequence of the market model is that it rationalizes action, hiding crucial human realities. Specifically, it obscures the fact that human bodies don't carry prices. It fails because people are autonomous agents with the power to talk back, to negotiate, and to reject the premise of the exchange entirely, a complexity the simple economic model just cannot capture.
The Manosphere uses these EP concepts to claim scientific clout, but the academic sources we looked at clearly identify critical shifts and biases in their appropriation of biological concepts. What are the key areas of misuse?
We can break the misuse down into three critical categories. First is the ultimate versus proximate confusion. This is a really fundamental error. Think of it this way. The ultimate goal in EP is the survival of the species, the gene's interest over millennia, say, maximizing reproductive success. The proximate goal is the conscious experience, feeling hungry and eating a sandwich or feeling attracted to someone's confidence.
So the Manosphere confuses the deep, unconscious genetic pressure with the conscious decision-making happening at the dinner table.
Precisely. Manosphere renditions often mistake the ultimate goal for the proximate goal, writing as if women actively and knowingly strategize to maximize fitness in this cynical, calculated way. They believe every conscious choice is a tactical manifestation of deep biological programming, rather than a mix of culture, individual experience, and subconscious drives. The second issue is elevating hypothesis as fact. The conjectural nature of hypotheses derived from EP, especially those concerning ancestral mating behaviors, is completely obscured. Conclusions leap from theory to absolute undeniability.
Can you give an example?
Sure. Some incels embrace the sexy son hypothesis, the idea that a woman chooses an attractive but unreliable mate so her son inherits good looks, maximizing his mating success. They take this as scientific vindication for their involuntary celibacy, ignoring the fact that it's just one of many competing hypotheses.
And the third, which we touched on earlier, is the pervasive sexual double standard.
This is a major area of academic critique. The Manosphere focuses almost entirely on female sexual assertiveness and opportunism, which they then use to justify their own manipulative strategies, while omitting or ignoring research on male instincts and behavior. They use EP to depict a monolithic and inflexible view of female biological behavior, but they rarely apply that same level of scrutiny or condemnation to male inclinations, such as the inclination towards extra-pair mating, which is considered unproblematic within their framework.
So it creates a highly biased and self-serving account of reality.
It does.
Finally, the academic sources address the profound ethical cost of this entire transactional worldview. When you reduce people to market value, you fundamentally shift the purpose of intimacy.
This is defined as the shift toward instrumental sex acts, used as a means to another end, whether that end is male attention, resource extraction, or emotional validation. This contrasts sharply with experiential sex, where the sexual act is an end in itself, sought for mutual pleasure, vulnerability, and connection.
And the ethical failure here lies in viewing the person as a means, not an end.
Yes. Viewing individuals as commodity objects or instruments inevitably leads to a denial of autonomy and a concept the sources call a failure of the imagination. This is the failure to stop and ask, what is this person likely to feel if I do X? What does this person want?
So when you are focused only on maximizing your SMV and executing game, you stop seeing the person in front of you as a full human being.
Exactly. The degradation comes from the loss of care-respect, which is the active valuing of a person as their own unique individual, respecting their self-conception and purposes, and responding to them accordingly.
The red pill framework promotes tactical interaction.
And ethical frameworks, by contrast, suggest focusing on mutual valuing, where utility and affection are built on shared trust, not transactional exchange. Utility and stability become important features of a loving connection, not the currency used to purchase it.
We started this deep dive with the silent scream of David, the man who was trading utility for desire, believing in a flawless contract that was actually a catastrophic error. We mapped the Manosphere's theory from the ruthless biological imperative of Bruffault's law to the alpha-beta dynamics, following that transactional logic into the sexual marketplace.
And we exposed the profound paradox at the heart of the game. The relentless pursuit of pure, utility-free desire often forces men like Julian to become aloof, calculating, and ultimately profoundly lonely. It denies them the very emotional connection they yearn for, the safe haven. We also saw that the intentional rejection of utility, as demonstrated by the Chicago anecdote, can collapse the fundamental partnership framework entirely, leaving all parties worse off.
The goal, according to the Manosphere, is to escape the utility trap. But the academic assessment argues that the moralistic, adversarial application of the market metaphor fails because it fundamentally misreads human nature and the nature of healthy long-term connection.
Yes. The conclusion from the reliable sources is that utility and stability are not inherently killers of desire. On the contrary, they are often the bedrock of long-term partnership. They create the security required for certain kinds of intimacy, vulnerability, and trust to flourish. The failure is the adversarial approach, which pushes a man to reject basic cooperation and empathy in favor of an isolating, performance-based persona.
So the challenge is distinguishing between instrumental interest, seeing your partner as a means to an end, and experiential interest,
Which is rooted in genuine connection and mutual respect.
You saw how the pursuit of pure, utility-free desire forced men to become aloof, calculating, and ultimately profoundly lonely. The final warning we found in the sources was this: if you stop trying to be useful, you start becoming irresistible. But here's the thought for you to carry forward. If being irresistible requires you to deny your own need for safety and connection, have you truly won the prize, or have you just exchanged one kind of trap for another?